Hey, so not long ago I made a video on the online viral case of the Cheektowaga, New York racism incident, and I stand by everything I said in the video. I've just watched another video, and it's assault and battery case from Hollywood, Florida. I don't know when exactly it's from. I'm guessing within the last year, but there's no date. I can't be sure about that. I'll put a link to the video. But basically, what that video shows is that there was a dispute at a car dealership. What it looks like is a Chinese American car dealership, and the customers were African American. Basically, what happened is a young man, 20 years old, took out a deposit from this dealership, and he changed his mind. He didn't want the car after all. But when he contacted the business, they said the woman said that she never refused him. She just said she would need that in paperwork. So what we have here is a video has emerged of the young man, and his family visiting the dealership. Then things get ugly and out of hand. And it looks like basically he has come with his family to throw a bit of weight around, and unfortunately ends up with the lady in the dealership. She ends up with a very nasty cut on her head. I'll put a link to the video so you can see for yourself. It's quite hard to see exactly what's going on, but it certainly looks like it's the family that's using the violence. And now the dealership is saying they're frightened to go to work. Part of the video shows a big guy sort of walking around. I don't know if he's the boy's brother. I don't know who exactly he is, but he's a big guy, and he's really acting like a thug. Basically, he's sort of throwing things around. He's using threatening language. I think it's disgraceful when there's children present. I think it's disgraceful that they brought their children. But clearly the family is in the wrong, and someone posted a link underneath saying sort of further information underneath saying that there had been subsequent arrests made, and I'm pleased there was, because it's an absolutely stupid way to deal with something. But there's something I would like to talk about, and it's I'm going to say now it's politically incorrect, but I'm someone who believes that if issues aren't discussed, then they aren't dealt with, or they aren't addressed. I don't believe in not addressing an issue, because some people take it the wrong way and might get offended. So underneath that video there was inevitably a lot of racial mudslinging. There was a lot of the N-word mentioned and so on. Now, as I said in the Cheektowaga video, that is racism, and I always condemn use of that word. Having said that, it is a very common trend that a lot of African Americans respond in this way when they do not get their own way. Now, if you're black and you're going to react to that with outrage, I would ask you to disprove it. I would ask you to tell me that there is not a trend with a lot of African Americans reacting this way when they do not get their own way. That's not the same as racism, which is a casual vilification of an entire race, or using racial slurs. But it's a simple fact that this wasn't an isolated incident. There is so many examples whereby this sort of thing can be seen. And it seems to me that it's up to African American community leaders to take some responsibility and condemn this sort of behaviour, because frankly it is prevalent within the African American community. This is a fact. And I know it's a politically incorrect fact, which means that people like to use the racism card because they don't want to deal with the facts, but this is a fact. Now, in a responsible situation there, what would have happened would be the young man, if he had a grievance, he would have taken out a lawsuit, or if he didn't know how to do that, one of his family members would have helped him with it. Just taken out a lawsuit against the business, said he feels he's been treated unfairly. But what happens? They go down as a family and they try to intimidate the people. That's just thuggish behaviour. And you know, it's very, very prevalent. And I just think that this is something that needs to be addressed. Now, before people say I'm only talking about the black community, you can make the same argument that there's so-called white trash, not a term I like, but in the white community who give white Americans a bad reputation. And I'm sure you could find examples within other racial groups. But pointing out a trend, pointing out a characteristic of a lot of people in a certain ethnic group is not racist. It's not. Vilifying an entire ethnic group is. Or, for example, the Cheektowaga incident, that was racism because the woman was attacking the man for no other reason than he was black. So I condemn that. But equally, I condemn this. And I don't condone the sort of language that was being used on the thread, i.e. the M-word repeatedly. That's uncalled for. But I do think there's a trend here. It's just like in London, there is a serious problem with black gangs, young black men in gangs. It's a fact. Now, there may well be socio-economic background to those problems, fine, but just talking about problems is not racist, and it really pisses me off when some people try to make out that it is. It is indisputable that far too many African Americans respond this way when they do not get their own way with violence. It's a fact. And of course there's plenty of African Americans who don't, who are responsible people, who deal with things in an adult manner and don't have this thug-like mentality, but there's too many that do. And quite frankly, you don't get the same sort of trend with Asian Americans. Certainly not as widespread. So yes, racism exists in America, unfortunately, but likewise, so does this sort of reactionary violence within the African American community. It's simply a fact. And I think it's a sad situation because in America, it seems to me, despite having an African American president, well actually Obama's technically mixed race, but regardless, America is still a deeply racialized society. So it is unfortunate to see the racial slurs on the video, but I can also understand people's frustration because what you had there was a woman being attacked in a pretty nasty way for no other reason than a dispute over a car deal. What that should have ended in is polite discussion. If it wasn't going to be polite, if it was going to be heated, well then okay, but at least do it in a court of law. This is just an example, and there's so many online, of violence within the African American community. And I'm so fed up of... I'm well aware there are some very unpleasant white racists out there. I know that. And they will use this sort of thing as an excuse for their racism. And some of them are equally guilty of violence. But it doesn't change the fact that there is a trend within the African American community. And actually, if you're black, instead of sort of always talking about discrimination and prejudice, instead of always assuming the victimhood mentality, why don't you speak up against the people like this? Because it seems to me far too many African Americans get defensive and will not condemn this behaviour, and that's also part of the problem. Far too many African Americans just use the victimhood mentality and will not condemn this sort of behaviour. So yes, I think it's unfortunate that people are using racial slurs beneath that, but at the same time I would like to see some African Americans say something like, I'm African American or I'm black and I condemn these thugs for behaving in this way. It's very rare that you see that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's rare. It's just like when moderate Muslims, they want nothing to do with extreme Islamists, but they won't take... well, it's not quite the same as they actually do condemn the Islamists. Far too often African Americans won't even condemn this sort of behaviour. Another example would be, I quoted a Gallotta fight recently with Tyson when there was a riot afterwards. Instead of condemning the rioters, I heard African Americans on the comments thread just talk about racism, instead of actually condemning the violence in the video. I.e. what happened was a lot of Tyson supporters who in that particular fight happened to be African American, they rioted afterwards. So instead of actually condemning their behaviour, there were people on the thread, check it out if you don't believe me, just trying to talk about racism. And it's a vicious cycle, because then the racists do come out and they use it as an excuse. So it's like a stupid cycle. And somewhere along the lines, people need to take responsibility. In other words, don't use racial slurs, don't generalise all black people, but at the same time, if you are black, you need to accept that this is a problem in the African American community. And if you're a decent person, you'll condemn it. Just like I, as a white guy, I will always condemn white racists, always. So that's just some important thoughts I think to think about.